wanted to talk about the intent of the people who created this park, the people who gave this park to us. As a kid at Fly on the Wall, I watched this park be created. I knew some of the characters, and I want to speak for them today. I think it matters what they wanted for this park and what is written in the law about this park. One of the park was first suggested by Conrad Worth, Connie Worth. We called him in our family because he was sort of my dad's enemy as well as his friend sometimes. They butted heads occasionally. But Conrad Worth proposed this park in 1935 when he was sort of running the CCC around here for the Park Service. He was a lifelong Park Service guy. He ended up being the director of the Park Service. In his proposals, for these first proposals for Point Reyes, he never mentioned farming as being an integral or any part of this park. This is sort of the underlying myth that we've been told about this park. Jared Huffman, our congressman, repeats this all the time. He talks about this wonderful, I heard him in the town hall the other day, this wonderful mosaic of farmland and wilderness. Well, that was never the idea. Connie Worth never once mentioned farming as a virtue. He mentioned the recreational values. He mentioned the biodiversity. That's what happened. He also mentioned the fact that this park is within an hour's drive of a megalopolis with a lot of underserved populations. Situation we're in today, a third of this park, which should be available for those folks, is not. And it was the same for Clem Miller. Clem Miller was the author of the legislation, and his wife, who stepped in for him after his death. Clem Miller never mentioned farming, ranching, as a virtue of this park, as somehow part of this wonderful mix of things this park offered. In fact, it was really the opposite. He had to go back and persuade his fellow congressmen that the ranchers would be gone. Because even Republican ranchers in those days, and we had some very good Republican conservationists, that's one of the sad things about our present moment, these people said, wait a minute, ranching in a national park? That's not the national park idea. And he had to sort of say, they're going to be gone. This industry is dying. The kids don't want to be dairymen anymore. They see that it's dying. They're going to be gone. Well, what nobody anticipated was what the subsidization of these ranchers would entail. It would make it much more agreeable to be a rancher in this park because you're subsidized by the government. My touchstones on this is a picture that Abby Rowe, the White House photographer, took on September 13, 1962, as JFK signed this park into law. And I like it because the far right of the picture is my dad, tall guy, gray-haired, graying. JFK signing in the middle. My dad's arch enemy. Well, anyway, we won't go into him. He's on the far left. I don't know how he got into the room, but he got in the room. It was Wayne Aspinall, who was the head of the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee, who stopped the wilderness bill for 8 years, single-handed, not letting it get out of committee. But the rest of those guys are great. And there's Clem Miller in the middle. He's standing at President Kennedy's shoulder. He's beaming down at this signing pen as it goes, and he has a book under his arm. It's the book my dad commissioned. It's called The Island Time, the Point Reyes Peninsula, and it was a book written to promote this park. And Clem has it under his arm. Secretary Udall, Interior Secretary Udall, who's sort of the driving force behind this park. You know, we like to think we had a lot to do with it out here, and we did have a lot to do with it out here, but Washington actually drove this park. JFK, Secretary Udall, really made this park happen. They wanted another park, a national seashore on the West Coast to complement Cape Cod and the others on the East Coast. And in his hand, he's got this book. I didn't notice this book until a couple of years ago. I said, there's my dad's book. I look at that picture. JFK has a year and 9 days left before his assassination. Clem Miller, who wrote the legislation, has 28 days left before his plane crash that kills him. He thought this was going to be the biggest achievement of his career. He didn't know how right he was. He only had 28 days left. So I want to speak for these guys. All men, I'm sorry, that's the 60s. I want to ask the questions they would ask the Park Service now and Deb Haaland now. First one was, one would be, why should American taxpayers subsidize private ranching on the public land of a national park? Why should they do that? Why? The argument we're given is that this is historic preservation and these historic ranches. Well, number one, they're all aluminum now. They don't resemble what they used to be. Number two, what is the return to the American people, the public, the tax owner, who owns this land? What is the return from these historic ranches? You can't visit them. You get run out. I've been run off ranches. Guy on home ranch who I happen to know, kind of like, didn't recognize me, came down as I walked through the ranch, which I had every right to do, and which the permit he signed allowed me to do, came up to me fast and said, "You know you don't belong here." I said, "Oh yeah, I belong here. I'm a taxpayer. This is mine." And I walked on through. He had set up fake national park signs at two places on the entrance to Home Ranch, right there at the beginning of the Cerro Trail where the cattle guard is, and then down in the gully below. And he said, "Didn't you read the signs, the Park Service signs?" I said, "I didn't know this at the time." I said, "Yeah, I read them. They have no force." I didn't know how true it was. He made those signs. The interesting thing to me is the Park Service knew about that, but tolerated it. Yeah, and in fact, where the second set of signs is at the gate in there, where it said no hikers, no bikes, return to the trailhead. That's all Gino's stuff. That is where the episode that Matthew talked about happened, right in that gulch, where the same owner, a leaseholder, bulldozed this long trail through the shrub and dumped the stuff in the stream, violating any number of federal laws. It wasn't the Park Service who found this. It was birders. The same with. Well, I walked through that ranch that day he tried to force me out. Along the fence is completely lined with elk antlers. There are dozens of them. If you read the website, the Park Service website, they say it's forbidden to collect elk antlers. They're needed by skunks and stuff to gnaw on them for the calcium. You can't collect them. It's a fine. I forget what it is, a $5,000 fine. It's 5 months in prison. A couple of guys who tried to do this on the elk reserve, they took an inflated boat, ran 12 antlers across the Marshall. They got arrested. But not so on the ranch. And they're still there. If you walk through that ranch, you'll see them there today. It makes me wonder about the capacity of the Park Service to do their job here. They surely have gone through that ranch. They let it go. The ranchers have become a very potent political lobby, and they've stopped the Park Service from doing their job. This is a long history in this park. Kevin Lunny, who's the spokesman for the. Here, let me drink something. I'm going to get it. Kevin Lunny, who is sort of the spokesman for the Ranchers Association, he wrote this 36-page scoping letter demanding all the things that the ranchers want. We want to be able to control native and introduced vegetation with fire if necessary or herbicides as we choose on the national park. Because we've sold this land to the Park Service, but we, the families who are now living on token rents and sub-market grazing fees, we want to select our successor. I mean, and you just goes on. We don't want any new, prohibitions from the Endangered Species Act that weren't in effect when we started to go in effect. We want no more public entry points in the pastoral zone for the public. The public, for the ranching community, is a hindrance to business, to private ranching on our public lands. It's gotten completely out of whack. And I guess the question they'd ask is, let me look at the language of the law, the enabling law that was there that day JFK signed it. Point Reyes, this is a 1962 law, Point Reyes shall be administered in a manner which provides for such recreational, educational, historic, preservation, interpretation, and scientific research opportunities as are consistent with, based upon, and supportive of the maximum protection, restoration, and preservation of the natural environment within the area. Can ranching operations ever be consistent with maximum protection, restoration, and preservation? Of course they can. This is the basic constitution and charter of this park, and from the beginning it's been violated because it's a nonsensical statement. In 2013 there was a coastal watershed assessment of this park, and it was an NPS assessment, not National Park Service assessment, and they wrote that because of threats to water quality in the park were bacterial and nutrient pollution from ranches and dairies. They quote, extremely high fecal coliform concentrations have been documented in streams adjacent to existing dairy operations. And they go on to say, areas where the dairies spread manure are correlated with the increased presence of invasive and noxious weed species. Can these conditions be reconciled with that commandment of our charter legislation, or even the Park Service guide management principles? They're the Bible of their the chief directive, the highest directive of their system, which says grazing will be allowed only where it does not cause unacceptable impacts on park resources and values. Well, there's heavy fecal coliform concentrations of waterways. There's eutrophication that Matthew talked about. There's the spread of invasive and noxious weeds. Are those acceptable in a national park? The Park Service goes on. Alternative B, the Park Service's preferred alternative. In their the EAS says, the Park Service EAS of this of the alternative, the virtues of the alternative, various alternatives says. Alternative B would continue to contribute to adverse impacts on water resources under water resources, the ones we've talked about, eutrophication, pollution. Under F, they say, impacts beneficial, there would be impact, they'd be beneficial in the long term because they would remove these pernicious impacts. So how is it, that this is the preferred alternative?
So it's the worst one of the 6 plans.
Yeah, under the EIS, under B, the Park Service says erosion, compaction of soil, loss of soil fertility caused by grazing and forage production and manure spreading would continue. With F, the one we want, all those impacts would cease. So it's the preferred alternative. This is just turning park principles upside down, and one of the things I worry about is the effect on the Park Service. Nobody but me talks about this, but I know a couple people in the Park Service. What does it do to your morale if you signed up in the service of what Stegner called America's best idea, and you are required from political influences, people like Huffman, you're required to do the things you're doing now in this park. What does that do to your morale? What did it do to Cicely Muldoon when she was here? What does it do to Kinkle when he's here now? I'll have to ask him sometime. Cicely, I kept thinking about her. She was a good but not real strong supervisor because she couldn't be. What did it take out of her to have to grant waivers for year after year, decade after decade, for ranchers in this park for being out of compliance with the Clean Air and Water Act. I mean, this is a national park, and the ranchers are almost never no ranches ever in compliance. So she has to grant them a waiver every year. I just wonder about that. I'm going on too long, so I'll just repeat what Matthew and everybody said. You know, cattle are the most biomassive species on the earth, 600 to 700 million tons, about twice the weight of humanity. And the question I always ask is, who domesticated whom? And they, wildlife is now 4%. Is this the kind of balance we want to maintain in this park? No. I want to just finish with what my dad said at the end of his book, Point Reyes, Island in Time, Point Reyes Peninsula. He had an author's, right after Secretary Udall, he wheedled a forward out of Secretary Udall, a nice forward. He said, the peninsula is what we have, and there are no more where it came from. This is his kind of way of talking. He just meant, these are unique places. You don't get them again. You don't get another chance at them. It is part of a shore that must serve uncountable millions in the more crowded times to come. We need to have what it takes to act boldly in their behalf, to save enough in the first place, and to remember ever after that the important things are not what we put on that shore, but what we find has always belonged there. Those crowded times have come, and they're going to continue to come, more and more crowded times. All the millions of people that will need this park, billions of people if you go on forever, that are going to need this park and need all 3/3 of it, and not just 2/3 of it. What has belonged on that shore since the Pleistocene as the dominant grazer is a tulio. Yeah. What does not belong is a cow. Thank you.